Hey there, and welcome back. Welcome to part 2 of my comparison between Melee and Brawl. Now that we've talked about Melee, let's talk about Brawl. Now, well, I do agree to an extent that Brawl is a little too similar to Melee in some ways because of the options from Melee that were put in, that returned in Brawl. I don't think that's such a bad thing because those options were really good, and they worked. So it's, kind of a case of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Though some of the options weren't so much fixed as they were tweaked. Let's take Adventure Mode, for example, which was renamed the Subspace Emissary. With that name, Nintendo and HAL Labs decided to add a story to the game, which was told through really cool cutscenes. You could also get all the characters playable, or have them join at certain points in the game. Or in the mode, anyway. And you could choose to play as any one of them, or you could create teams of them. And let's see, there was also a way you could power up your characters. If you remember the stickers I told about that you could collect in this game, well, they could be used as power-ups for your characters. And improve certain aspects of them. Very cool. So overall, the adventure mode was very much improved, and to me, it just feels more like an overall adventure. Very long. Well, not super long. It's about 9 hours. Pretty long for a game mode, but yeah. The other thing that was tweaked was the special battles. Remember I told you about the special Melee and Melee? Well, the special Brawl in Brawl, obviously. Not only did it add tons of more options, not only did it add a great deal more options, it also allowed you to layer on options. Multiple. Like if you want to have giant characters that can run really fast while jumping with as if there's very light gravity, go for it. You can layer on almost as many options as you want to. Very cool. And definitely allows you to create some very unique battles. Now there was another thing that was also kind of fixed, and that was being able to take snapshots. You see, in Melee there was an option in the special Melee called Camera Mode, where you could control a camera and take photos. That was kind of cool at the time, but as I look back on it now, it wasn't all that well done. For one thing, you had to have a controller plugged into port 4 in order to actually use the camera. So you had to have another person control the camera while 3 others got to play around, And it was, I guess, like I said, it was good at the time, but it could have been a lot, but even then it could have been a lot better. But they improved that feature in Brawl, where this time you can take a snapshot anytime you pause the game. Very cool. Very cool. Now, among those tweaks, there was tons of other stuff that was added to this game, like the stage builder. Though people where you could, basically the name speaks for itself. You could build your own stages. Though people did have some complaints with it, saying it was a little too limited compared to other editors from other games. Like the Park editor and the Tony Hawk games. But to me, while it is a little limited to a degree, I think it's only really limited by your imagination, because if you really take your time, put some skill behind it, you can create some pretty cool stages to fight on. Now, another option that was added here and that people definitely have a complaint with was the masterpieces, which are basically just game demos of older games. Yeah, I can see why people would have a problem with that, because it is kind of part that makes this game really big. Why they had to make it dual layered, made the disc dual layered for it. But I can also kind of see why they did it, because not only is this game filled with tons of Nintendo fan service, but it also pays a lot of respect to the history of Nintendo. And they wanted to add some demos of games that pay that respect, that kind of reflect on how much respect Nintendo pays to the history of it. And that's real, and that's kind of a good thing, especially if there's probably like little kids out there who wanted this game, want to play this game, but never did grow up during the times of the NES or the Super Nintendo. They never did grow up during those times, or maybe they grew up with other consoles like the Genesis or the PlayStation, and they decided to get a Wii, because they heard about this game and heard how good it was, and now they get a chance to play like games from like the NES and 64 and Super Nintendo. We'll play little demos from them anyway for those games, and that's kind of a cool thing, I know Super Robot Sojo, when he did his review on this game, he actually liked the masterpieces. So people have their own opinions. Let's see, what other complaints did people have with this game? The other complaint people had with it was the events. There was too few events, like compared to Melee, because Melee had 51 events. This game has 41 of them. But those people also forget that there's actually co-op events. In fact, the people at Nintendo HAL Labs added co-op play to a lot of the solo modes, like All Star, the Stadium, even the Adventure mode. So there's also co-op events to play through as well. Maybe not as many as there are solo events. There's only 21 co-op events, but they're still fun, to play through with a friend. Let's see, what other problems do people have with this? People also complain about the speed reduction, and that it's a little, and the miss of the advanced play, which again, like I said, were glitches. I mean, and yes, you could complain. You could say that that they're not. You could argue that they're not and all that because there's a practical use for them. But a lot of games have glitches that have practical uses, such as the grenade launcher glitch with Jill in the GameCube remake of Resident Evil. The first Resident Evil. It's a glitch, but it's a practical one. But it still doesn't change the fact that it is a glitch. And the speed reduction, I think, is not such a bad thing because it makes it feel more balanced, for everyone to have fun with. In fact, I think all the characters feel a little more balanced, because that's another complaint, is that some of the characters don't feel quite as dominant. Some of the characters don't feel as dominating as they were in Melee. Again, not too bad to me. Makes things more evened out. Makes all the characters more fun to play with. There's no, one character isn't all that much better. I mean, you can have opinions and choose your characters, which you can choose which characters are top tier and which ones are bottom tier, based on your experiences. But really, they're all fun to use in their own way. And they're all great, and they're all great. Now, some of the problems I have, there are some problems that people share with me. One thing is the load times. The load times in Brawl can be pretty bad, especially if you get done playing a game demo and you go back to the main game. Yeah, the load times can be pretty brutal. But that's because the game is so big, and in fact, because it's dual layered. Because this game is very, very big. In fact, the save data for it takes up 128 blocks of memory. Very large. So I can understand why that happens, but still, it's kind of, don't really like it. But one of the problems I do have with the game is sometimes with the AI. Now, the AI is definitely reworked and definitely a little better. Whereas the AI in Melee felt a little too artificial at times. That's another problem with Melee. Its AI feels a little too artificial. Whereas in Brawl, the AI feels a little more human and can definitely give you a better challenge, even on the easiest setting. But sometimes it feels a little too against you at times, especially if it gets a final smash. Like, let's just say if you're playing a battle royale on Brawl, on the Brawl mode, or in group mode. If you're playing, all 4 people fighting against each other, and you're the only human opponent, when it gets a final smash, it could target all the other characters, but it seems to be specifically targeted towards you. It'll try to target you and try to use the final smash on you. And to me, that's kind of unfair. I wish that had been worked on a little bit better. Another kind of smaller problem, but it's only a small problem, is the fact that sometimes the computer can't differentiate between which is a loss and which is a self-destruct. Sometimes if you self-destruct, sometimes it will count it as a loss. Kind of stupid, but I can kind of see, you know, well, I can't really see why. It's still, it's not a game killer, but it's still kind of dumb. You know, wish that had been worked on a little bit better. Still, but hey, what can you do? Other than that, I have to say, there's not really a great deal of problems, and some of the problems are just minor nitpicks, really. They're not game killers. You know, at least not to the extent like, you know, some of the problems in Melee are. And believe me, there are noticeable problems in Melee. Okay, very noticeable, and sometimes can kind of bring the game's quality down. Design-wise, Melee was a good-looking game. But while the characters do look really good, at least for GameCube standards, some of the stages are a little low res. You know, don't really make use of the GameCube's power all that much. Yeah, just the graphics in general just don't seem, you know, all that. Yeah, it doesn't really seem like they really made good use of it. Like, you know, like an early launch title like Luigi's Mansion, which was a launch title of the GameCube, and served almost more of a tech demo for what the GameCube could do, and it looked really good for the time. You know, it looked great. Maybe not as good as the later games, but like Metroid Prime, but it still looked better than Melee. Just to say. Now Brawl, well, I have to say, it doesn't look quite as it doesn't look quite as good as some other games out there. It definitely does come very close. In fact, it's probably one of the better looking games on the Wii. Just to say that, just to put that out there. So, and of course the music. Well, the music in Melee was great. You know, I can't find any problems with it. But the music in Brawl is just awesome. You know, in fact, especially with being able to collect individual soundtracks, that's just very cool. Pardon me. And for the most part, this game pretty much has the largest soundtrack of any video game out there, ever. Pardon me again. So, when it comes down to it, between these two games, I think they're both equally good. They have their own sets of problems, but I think they're both equally good games, you know. Melee for its originality of the options that were added, and Brawl for the amount of extra content that was added and just making everything bigger and better. But when it comes down to it, I pick Brawl over Melee. Melee because not only the fact that it's one part great fighting game that's more balanced than Melee, but it's 3 parts Nintendo memorabilia. And I like that. A game that can pay respect to the history of games from the past. That's very cool. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think. You know, tell me if I'm wrong, you know, whatever. If I am or not. And just let me know what you think. That'll be all. So, see ya.